Well, hello good people. Part 4 of making up this Pietenpol engine using what was going to be a scrap small bore Ford motor. We'll stick it together today. I'm just putting a bit of STP on the bearing caps. I know we all have our favourites of guns we use to stick motors together. I quite like STP. It's a hotel toothbrush. Don't have any shortage of those. Don't use them for my teeth. They're usually rather wonky. The brushes, that is, and probably my teeth too. But they're jolly useful for all manner of workshop things, so they generally get chucked in the bottom of my suitcase. Anyway, STP on all the caps, and then we'll stick the crank in. It's not going to be a very tight engine, this, so I can't say I'm too bothered about it, but this stuff's good as assembly lube. I probably should have turned the engine upside down, but it's a bit of a swine to manhandle, and I had a bit of a mess around earlier, and it's all right doing it this way. So let's just put the crank there for a moment. I put some bolts in the end of it, partly because they're going to be the propeller bolts, and secondly because it makes it a little easier to manhandle. It means you can sort of hold it outside of the timing gear and hold the prop bolts, and it's fairly straightforward. I'm going to put this center cap on first with the top bolt. That should go straight through. I can put the castle nut on the inside, and that's a nice fit. I've cleaned the threads up and everything. That should hold the show together while the rest of the bolts go in. Well, that's not going anywhere. Let's get bottom bolts through, I guess. Make sure the nut runs up it nicely before I use lots of bad language. Yes, it does. That's just finger tight for the moment, which is fine. We'll put what was the rear main bearing cap on now. It's now the front main bearing. See, it's got quite a good thrust surface each side. The Babbitt's fairly good on this one. And this is the drain. It's basically, there isn't a seal. It's got a flinger ring on the crankshaft, and it drains into this sort of double slot arrangement and then runs out that pipe there. Now that's the one I cut off when I was first dangling the engine from the crane, because Mr. Pietenpol catches that oil and gets it into the dripper tray rather than the original version, which actually returned it past the dripper tray and into the sump proper. Right, they're all finger tight. Those ones are a little more than finger tight. I'll run around and tighten them up properly now. That's all tightened up properly. I haven't put any split pins through the castle nuts yet. That can wait until later. The next thing is to put the cam followers in, followed by the camshaft. When I pulled this thing apart, I had the good sense to keep all the valves, guides and cam followers in their respective position. These numbered valves are the inlet valves, and their corresponding exhaust valve is opposite. Obviously there's the followers. Of course, these are a little unusual compared to what I'm sort of more commonly used to. there's no way of adjusting the valve clearance other than grinding the mushroom head of the stem there. So I kept all these in the right position. I'm sure these are all made exactly the same length, but the clearances looked okay before. I am going to grind the valves only very slightly. Obviously the valve, you grind the valve, it slightly moves down into the seat and closes the clearance up. The clearances were okay before. This is a sort of demonstration engine, so I'm not intending, unless any of them close up completely, to grind the bottoms of these stems at all. Anyway, the first thing first, put these into the crankcase with a bit of lubricant on each one. So that's number 1 inlet. Of course, it's numbered 1, 2, 3, 4 because that's still the flywheel end, even though it's now the front of the engine and our propeller end. So number 1 inlet goes in here. Number 1 exhaust. That little Ford script there is the timing mark. It lines up with a corresponding mark on the camshaft gear. I'll just move you to the side so I can put the camshaft in. Obviously I've already put some sticky over the bearings. That's the corresponding mark. It's just a dimple that's drilled into the camshaft gear. It's also used for timing up the distributor, but of course we're not going to worry with the distributor. I'm going to bodge a magneto on the end. I'm going to stand the engine upright in a moment to put the valves in. Before I do that, I'll put some sticky stuff on the cam lobes. True to form, I've pressed on without turning the camera on and fitted a couple of valves. That's the number 1 exhaust, number 1 inlet. You remember they have that split guide and I had to fit this in and knock it down. Well, I was wondering how to get the things back up in and suddenly realised I could use a ring spanner to push the split guide into place. So let's put the number 4 valves back in. So these two are on the rock. Even though they haven't got their valve keepers on, the springs are holding the split guide in place and the valves will act normally. So those 2 followers are down properly now. So let's get the number 4 exhaust valve. They're not as grubby as when they came out. So I'm hoping they slide in without too much trouble. So valve in. Yeah, it starts going in. Then I found the 19mm or 3/4 ring spanner. Fits. It's actually gone straight in place. That's all right. Let's try the inlet valve. Valve in. That's a very loose guide actually. So that's going to need holding up with a spring. So that's the guides in. A viewer suggested compressing these in the vise and then using locking wire each side to keep the spring compressed to put them in place. And that's what goes on Curtis OX5s evidently, and it sounds like a very good idea. However, Grandpa Dan was showing how to use a big screwdriver the other day when he was putting some valve gear together, and as he's the high priest of a Shade Tree Model A Ford mechanicking, well, I'll try it the Grandpa Dan way. A bigger screwdriver somewhere, here we go. It was easier up this end because it's got that high dam, a bit like Aswan in Egypt, but not quite so easy here. However, I'm sure I can persevere. There we go. Of course, that's holding the guide in place as well. There we go. That's it. Good. Now 2 and 3 must come to top dead center, so 180 degrees. Now 2 of these will be rocking and 2 will be fully down. So let's see which is which. There we are. Number 3 is rocking, so number 2's fully down. And that's pretty much bottom dead center, which shows that the timing's about right as well. Just going to grind these valves very lightly. I just want to see if they actually sit nicely in their seats or not. A little bit of paste. It's a bit odd not being able to remove the valve fully, but I think that looks fine. And yeah, the seat looks all right as well. So they certainly looked right when I took them out and cleaned them. It's really just to sort of make sure, kind of witness them back into the seat rather than any great need to remove lots of material. That looks all right. There's a nice grey seat all the way around. Let's try the inlet valve. The valve train is now complete. I've just checked the gaps again. I just used a slip of paper just to make sure there was a gap between everything. Sounds a bit crude, but it was as good as anything. Just to use the feeler, it worked very well. There's a gap between them all, so I think that's done. The next thing is to wrestle the block onto its side and slide the pistons and rods in. There we are, in true style. I fitted the number 1 piston and rod without turning the camera on. There we are. I fitted new nuts on all the big ends. These are the old big end nuts. That's one of the better ones. This one's one of the worst. Look, horribly rounded off. Anyway, I've got 8 new castle nuts. I get my nuts and bolts from a company called Namrick. This isn't a paid thing. I just quite happy to mention who they are. They're in Shoreham by Sea in West Sussex, and they do stuff by mail order. You'll find them online. I'll stick the name on the screen. They're very good. I bought a whole load of new fixings and bits from them. I think it was about £30 worth. I don't bother buying 1 or 2. I buy bags of 10 of everything because it's just so cheap. The other, no, cheap's the wrong word, good value. The other thing I do is clean up these threads on the rods. This is a die stock. I've just adjusted the die. It's not really taking a cut. All it's doing is cleaning the existing thread, particularly across the split pin hole. There we go. That's all very nice and easy. Well, due to a monumental balls up then, I managed to not press the record button and fit the number 2 piston without recording it. Never mind, let's do number 3. It's fundamentally the same. So, I've got a piston ring compressor. I didn't have one when I did the Praga engine. I managed to cut my fingers slightly when doing the Praga motor. It had those new oil control rings which were as sharp as anything and a bit too stiff. I don't know where this compressor came from. It's a perfect size for this. Usually things are stolen from the Ministry of Defence, but I don't think this was. I think it just came in a random box of stuff. Anyway, crank pin to the bottom, and I'm just going to pass that through the bore, so the rod down through the bore. Piston on the top, make sure the compressor is nice and square, which it is. And then I'm just going to gently tap the top of the piston with the end of the hammer whilst holding the rod. It's the right way around, got the skirt in the right place, it's numbered as well. So the piston is now basically at top dead center. Let's put a bit more STP on the pin again. Everyone has their favourite assembly lube or similar. Your Marvel Mystery Oil or Gear Oil or whatever you want. I think a bit like religion. I'm not sure any of them are better than any of the others, but I think the placebo effect can be quite powerful, even if it is all allegedly in the mind. That's the short block buttoned up pretty much. A few split pins to go in still, big ends and some of the mains. I need to order some seals from O'Neill Ford and a few other bits, but that's good. It's a bit stiff. It'll be alright once it's got a propeller on it anyway. It's all because of those nicely honed cylinders. I've just had a mess around with manifolds and just a sort of little bit of looking into the future. The next thing is to start making some pipe work, which I'm going to start on in the next few days. I was going to pick up wood for the propeller today, but it was pouring with rain when I passed Exeter on the way home, and I didn't bother. Probably a bit lazy, but in the back of the car I had something rather significant for the Oronka C2 project. Of course, I'm not going to tell you what it is. You'll have to watch the next video. As always, thanks for watching.